Apology accepted, Captain Nita.
Hi, Misha here, and this week after Thanksgiving has been pretty busy. But I thought we would try to squeeze in another little list with more 6-inch Black Series figures. And as you know, if you follow that, I like units, troopers. But sometimes you need to go higher up the food chain and talk about officers. So today we're going to look at various Imperial officers and even a couple of First Order. We have some generals, some admirals. We have maybe some lower ranking ones in the field. We also have some Moffs and Grand Moffs. And we have someone that I swear I encountered in Albuquerque about 10 years ago. Wonder whatever happened to him. Last time I heard he went to visit someone in the nursing home. We even have a couple of figures from the new Endor series, which is kind of what I was waiting on to do this video. Because, yeah, we have some pretty neat examples of the Imperial officer we've been given. In fact, let's start with them. Why not? So here are the two first Imperial officers, imps from Endor. We have Officer Ferrix, which I think everyone, myself included, thought was a name until we realized when the show came out it was a planet. And we have Officer Dark Times. Let's start with this guy. He's quite interesting. And these are both, generally speaking, kind of generic officers, which is nice. Most of the rest we've received in the Black Series have been specific, which is also good, but it's good to have just your generic officer here. And this seems to be a lower ranking guy, and seems to be one kind of in the field. The Imperial Officer Corps, not unsurprisingly, came from the remainder of those from the Republic Officer Corps, sans Jedi. For some reason, they didn't want to employ Jedi. Can't imagine why. They were almost always human, and majority were male. The uniform was actually designed by Tarkin, first Captain, then Admiral, then Grand Moff. And it was designed to be utilitarian, useful, and not flashy, which I actually like. I don't like flashy uniforms. And there were rank plaques here on the breast. Usually yellow for government, or red and blue for various officers. There were also code cylinders on the belt. But these are somewhat color coordinated. This guy here, I believe, is black, which means he would be part of the Stormtrooper Corps. Although some TIE fighter pilots, when they were not in uniform, also wore black. Other times they would wear the standard kind of OD green, which was used by both the Navy and Army. And gray would kind of appear too, although this would be more closely identified with security officers, i.e. loyalty officers. So the whole setup here is very much reminiscent of kind of communism and Nazism. And this figure is pretty neat. He has the cap, which was regulation but not required. He has on gloves, at least I think he does, which were again regulation but not required. He also has on this leather rain slicker. The boots are also leather, as were parts of the belt. And I think this rain jacket is pretty neat because it shows that this figure is out in the field, at least to some extent, wearing this coat. It's also interesting that the rank plaque gets moved onto the coat when he's got it on. And I think a lot of people thought this would be total reuse when it came out, but it's really not. The middle part and even the belt are different. Even the head's different because the cap isn't removable. And this coat here is totally new. So, more new to this than maybe first apparent. And even does come with his weapon, because while these were officers, they were meant to lead at least lower ranking ones, like this guy from the front. Of course, his elbow does bend, but I thought you might be able to see it easier this way. This is the SE-14R blaster. We think of it as kind of the Death Trooper blaster, but it actually dates all the way back to the original A New Hope. While it wasn't in the film, it was in promo shots, and is actually based on a Swiss submachine gun, modified, cut down, and chopped down. In universe, it's made by Blastech, because of course it is, and it's meant to be a rapid-fire handgun, kind of loosely based on the SR pistol used by the Separatists in the Clone Wars. It's powerful, especially at short range, but also can overheat. So there's that. But it was a standard officer's sidearm and weapon. I think it's nice that he comes with this. Several figures do now, but that's okay. But I do wish he had some kind of holster. But at least the way the cape or rain slicker goes around him, you can kind of tuck it inside. So this is our officer kind of in the field or on planet side in a bit of bad weather gear. But what about combat? Well, that's where this version comes in, the so-called Ferrex. This was actually supposedly at least the type of officer that killed Andor's father, although I don't know if it's actually supposed to be him or not, or just one like him. These were the lead groups of clones, later stormtroopers, and these were kind of in their battle dress. While they were trained on the SE-14R pistol, they also were trained on the standard E-11 blaster rifle, which of course is based on the Sterling L2A3 or Sterling Mark IV, which naming convention you prefer, submachine gun. He has the chest armor here, which on this figure is fixed in place. Goes down to a small backpack, power pack. And then he has a protective helmet, very World War II styling, and that is actually removable, as are the goggles. This, of course, is a reuse of the Mud Trooper, and it's much more of a reuse than our other guy. But we do get a new head, and of course he's in kind of all black, so we would presume he's part of the Stormtrooper Corps as well. And since he's out in the field, only commanding a squad, he's probably a lieutenant, maybe a little higher, a little lower. Interestingly, it seems like in the Imperial military, captain comes before commander. So it's usually lieutenant, captain, commander, and then on from there, admiral. Not getting into the things like lieutenant commander and all that stuff, but those seem to be the ranks. And early on, the Corps was mostly made up of veterans from the Clone Wars. And this actually presented a problem before the rebellion really cropped up, because there weren't enough ships to go around. So there were more high-ranking officers than there were ships, meaning a lot of fresh-faced officers, recruits, weren't really active or had a desk job, which meant that they really weren't keeping up with their skills. And even wartime people were getting old and complacent. Again, it's something we see in Season 1 of Endor. With that, let us move on. But I really do like both of these figures, but especially this one. Just neat. Here we have Grand Moff Tarkin. And he, like I said, designed the uniform. It was to be utilitarian and to also not really promote any pomp or ego. So no ribbons were to be displayed, just the code cylinders and the ranking plaque. Now, what is a Grand Moff? Well, again, it goes all the way back to A New Hope, so it's not a Disney thing. He started off in the Clone Wars as a captain and then an admiral, and then he gets promoted to Grand Moff. Now, that was a position created for him. The Moffs were set up as sector or regional governors, and there were roughly 20, at least before the rebellion really kicked off. And Grand Moff as a position was really created for Tarkin, and he was the first to hold it. So it was a military/political position, and it really goes to show you that by the time of the Death Star, the line between political position and military position was blurring majorly. Not that it doesn't do it in the real world, too. But just because someone held the rank of Admiral didn't necessarily mean that they had climbed the ranks. Likewise, just because someone was a Moff did not have to mean that they did not have military experience. As far as the figure here, I mean, you might think he's plain, but, I mean, it's Peter Cushing, and it's Doctor Who. He doesn't really need much. Again, just a standard body. Of course, the character didn't have a hat. It was always optional. The one disappointing thing is his boots. I think if they wanted to really have fun with this character, they should have given you alternate legs where you could have him in his house slippers. Some of you, I'm sure, will understand that. There was kind of a problem with the Death Star, though. Remember how I said there's a lot of people ranking up who were from the war, and a lot of the younger ranking people usually didn't get time? Well, this wasn't too long after the rebellion was kicked off, only a couple of years, and they really weren't considered a threat. Meanwhile, Tarkin really kind of gathered amongst himself there to the first Death Star a lot of the ranking talent and people that he served with during the Clone Wars. This would kind of present an issue when it went kablooey. Not really going in any particular order. Next, let's talk about these two. Over on the left, we have the so-called Death Star Trooper. And on the right, we have yet another officer. This is Vice Admiral Rampart from the Bad Batch. Even though he's a new character, he pretty much embodies one of the chronologically earlier Imperial soldiers, Imperial officers, and one that directly worked under Tarkin and received acclaim from Tarkin. And yeah, Tarkin would take guys like this and get them on board the Death Star with him. So he could have been there. He's wearing the standard uniform, placards, and the code discs on the shoulders and belt. He's also carrying another pistol that was commonly used by Imperial officers, the DL-21, another creation of BlazTech. This is a pretty common pistol. In the real world, it was created based on the Charter Arms AR-7, the survival gun in 22, but of course heavily modified and given a sight. I've done a video on the main Mishaco channel on the Israeli pilot's version of this. But we see this usually shipped with a lot of Imperial officers, even before the Black Series. But we also saw it in the hands of Ponda Baba in the Cantina, although it had a different grip and slightly different muzzle. And even Dengar carried a version, and even Rebel soldiers at Hoth. It's just a ubiquitous pistol in the Star Wars world. Yeah. So, this is another pretty standard officer. One of the people that would have been high-ranking and whatnot. Vice Admirals were above Rear Admirals but below a standard full admiral. They could either be a commodore or a fleet commander, depending on when they're put in the field. Nice enough figure. Again, standard body. I just wish he had a little holster for his gun. I think the officers just seem better because they're primarily not there for combat duties, at least guys in kind of more shipboard gear like this. Thought I'd just bring him out. Why not? It's always good to have a Vice Admiral. Our next guy kind of crosses lines, though. The Death Star Trooper. This figure dates back to the original Kenners when it was initially released as the Death Squad Commander, which definitely has fascistic overtones. Later he was called the Death Star Trooper, or sometimes Star Destroyer Commander. But we see these in A New Hope, on the Death Star 1. In universe, these were also handpicked by Tarkin and given additional training. They came from the Naval Corps. Some were lower ranks like sergeants, others were lieutenants, even captains. And they were kind of used for different roles. They would be given combat roles, but also non-combat, more administrative or even technical roles, like helping with the Death Star laser. They were also used as guards quite a bit. In fact, Death Star Guard, or Sentinel, is another name for these. And they wear pretty much the standard uniform. But we have this big mushroom helmet and gloves, very a la Darth Vader. And they actually carry various sidearms. They can either have the standard E11, or like this guy, he comes with the DH-17. Rather than me pulling this out, here's another one, because this is another very common gun in Star Wars. We see this in the hands of rebels, in the opening of A New Hope. We also see them used at Hoth. But we see these guys sometimes carrying them, or sometimes they carry nothing at all. This is a bit more of a bulky gun than the DL-21. The DL-21 is a pretty standard blaster, good close range. This has more middling range, higher capacity of 50 to 100 shots, and it does have an optic. It was interestingly designed to punch through armor, but not the hull of a ship, because this was primarily built in universe to be something used for self-defense on board a ship, or boarding actions, as we see in the show. In the real world, the prop, much like the E11, was based on the Sterling, but more heavily modified. It also had this early occluded eye, kind of single point style optic on it. And originally, the models for these were actually resin props. They weren't actually firing props. Later on, we'd see them. While, of course, the guys on board the Death Star 1 went with it, and if he were there, Rampart would too. We see the trooper here with his unique mushroom helmet. Again, in Return of the Jedi, not only are they on board the Death Star 2, checking codes like we see with Vader when Shuttle Tydirium comes in, we also see some stationed on board, or on the moon Endor itself, on the bunker, in the bunker there, protecting the SEAL generator. So they were used as squad leaders and commanders, guards, admin, comp checks, but also combat. So they were kind of in between. They were an officer style, an elite style, but kind of put out in the field, taking a more active role with his interesting helmet. It's a neat figure. Of course, the DH-17 is removable, and also the helmet is removable on this guy. And he's relatively new in the series. Well, I guess maybe not now, but when he came out, it seemed like we waited a long time to get him along with the Rebel Fleet Trooper. They're very kind of analogous to each other with very similar helmets and weapons, actually. But considering they were both in the original Kenner line, it just felt like we really needed them. Of course, Rampart wasn't, because he wasn't really invented until 2020 or 2021, whenever Bad Batch first came out. But yeah, these guys got blew up with the first Death Star. Let's move on to everyone's favorite film. Two guys that actually survived The Empire Strikes Back, unlike Captain Nita or Ozzel. We have General Veers, and we have Captain, later Admiral Piet, who actually survived at least until Return of the Jedi. Not so much after that, probably. Again, this is the standard figure, but it also goes to show you Army and Navy. Looking at Piet quickly, he's a base figure, but I wanted him like this just because I had the basic Imperial officer when I was a kid, one of the Kenner toys. Now he comes, just as you see it here, removable cap. He does come with a DL-21, but since he doesn't have a holster, I gave it to someone else. I thought he looked kind of good just with his hands behind his back, actually playing Imperial politics very well. That's kind of what's funny. Yeah, it was better to be almost a low-ranking officer than a high. But after the destruction of the first Death Star, that's when we start to see a lot of the lieutenants and captains getting promoted, like Piet here, to higher ranks, because one, the rebellion's actually in full swing and we have a true galactic civil war. Two, the Empire's actually cranking out more and more ships, Star Destroyers included. And three, so much of the old guard was lost with the Death Star 1. So it left room for people to move up in the ranks. Unfortunately, some, like Piet, were skilled, while others, either through incompetence just based on that, or just lack of practice, were not. So it was kind of a mixed bag how it would go. But here he is, one of the quintessential Imperial officers. Fun fact that when they did Return of the Jedi, they actually didn't bother to update his rank plaque to his position as Admiral. But he survived Vader's wrath more than once, so that's got to be worth something, right? I thought it was a figure worth grabbing. By the way, he was an exclusive. I can't remember which store, as was his Army counterpart over here, General Veers. I think he was Walgreens. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I think one was Entertainment Earth and one was Walgreens. I can't remember who was who. Piet's neat, but he's a little plain, but that's okay. I kind of like plain. But Veers does everything Piet does, and then some. If you notice, he's in his battlefield armor, chest piece, helmet. He even has goggles up here, although unlike the one from Endor, the Endor we looked at the beginning, these don't come down, but that's okay. He also does come with the holster, yay, and is supplied with a DL-21 blaster pistol. He does not come with an E11, but I had a spare one, so I threw it in his hands. I thought it looked neat. I figured since the AT-AT driver, commander, had one, why not give one to old Veers here? But what's really neat about this figure is you can make him look like Piet, just with a different face. This armor piece and this helmet come off, giving him more of the uniform we first encounter him in at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. And to make him look right, he even comes with a matching olive drab green cappy. So he really is a 2-in-1 figure. which is neat because back in the Kenner days, you basically had to buy 2 figures to get that look, although subsequent ones from various other collections over the years have kind of given you the twofer. But the armor lays really well, buckles on quite well. The helmet even has his little comms mic. I think he's really cool. He wasn't my first officer I actually picked up, again, because he was a store exclusive. I had to wait to find him. But I think he was the first one I really wanted, because I like General Veers. Very crisp officer. But then again, so was Piet. So these two together kind of match. And it goes to show you that both the Imperial Army and Navy wore the same essential uniforms, at least at the higher ranks of General and Admiral, General and Captain, what have you. What do you think? Do you like Veers here in more of a battlefield dress? Or do you like Mr. Piet in more of his executor shipboard dress? Let me know. Well, the Imperial uniform came in green and gray and black, so why not white? And there were basically 2 versions of white. Let's begin here. Grand Admirals had a white uniform, very standard, except of course it had an updated rank plaque and it had gold trim, gold epaulets. It's about as fancy as Imperial uniforms ever got. Of course, this is Grand Admiral Thrawn. The whole Grand Admiral thing was set up directly by Palpatine. By law, there could not be more than 12, and they were established a couple of years. They really were established around the time the rebellion first kicked off, if we're being honest. Some were political appointments, some were strategic military geniuses, and some were technical geniuses. Of course, Thrawn kind of being, if not political, at least the other 2. And they were meant to be fleet commanders. They could command the entire fleet. For example, Thrawn commanded the 7th Fleet. Canons and legends kind of disagree exactly when he was promoted. In canon, it's a couple of years before the Battle of the first Death Star, the Battle of Yavin. In legends, it was right before the Battle of Endor, so 3 or 4 ABY. Although, to kind of make these gel, some say that he was promoted in secret, but it wasn't made public because he is an alien. The blue skin might have tipped you off. He's a Chiss. And the Grand Admiral here hailed from Timothy Zahn's books, first published, I think it was in 1991. I remember the hullabaloo and how cool it was to get new Star Wars again, and what a great creation. Zahn didn't want to do another Sith Lord as the villain, yet he didn't want to do just a bog standard Admiral or General. So he kind of invented the Grand Admiral rank and the character himself, and happily, thanks to Rebels and other sources, he's back as part of canon and was not erased with the expanded universe. The figure, nothing much to look at. He's just a white officer, although he does get his own unique pistol and a holster. I wish they all had holsters. You might have noticed by now. This is the RK3 blaster. For once, not a Blaztech. It was made by Mayor Sun, although later it would be Sun Blaz once they combine themselves. It's a smaller gun, powerful, accurate. I'm sure it's perfectly logical because Thrawn is using it, so there's not a lot of information about it, but I'm happy that the figure, the toy itself, actually comes with something special and a holster to put it in. Okay, I'll shut up about holsters now. That's really all he comes with. This is the one from the archive release, so it has a bit of an updated face, red eyes included. For once, red eyes don't actually mean Sith, although I think that's mostly yellow-orange. Put some red in. We could go all day about Thrawn, but a really cool character. Interestingly, I said there were 12 Grand Admirals. They're pretty much the final authority. Very few people in the Empire could override them. Even a Moth, perhaps even a Grand Moth, could not, and they reported directly to the Emperor, or at the very least his immediate stand-in like Grand Vizier. But they had as much power as anyone, and they were a major concern to the rebellion/New Republic when they first came to power. They really needed to account for all the Grand Admirals. Again, they either wielded technical expertise, strategic genius, or political machinations skill. Thrawn wasn't great at the politics, but he was great at everything else. If you want to be in the Imperial military, but really like being in virginal white, another way to go would be become the director of an Imperial bureau. So here we have Director Orson Krennic, Rogue One, and unfortunately this is a pre-face technology figure. Doesn't really bug me, but probably bugs you. Again, it's a pretty standard body. He does have a holster though, and that's for his non-regulation DT-29 heavy blaster pistol. This is a close-range, powerful gun with a scope. In fact, it's so powerful that if it's on its highest setting, it can be exhausted in just 6-7 shots. Again, it's a non-standard pistol though. He does come with his version of a rain slicker/cape. It's just hard plastic, but at least it does come off. And so then you have a guy in pretty much a white uniform. Directors are quite high-ranking, on the level of a Moff, give or take. And you can have security directors, technical directors, research projects, Rogue One's plot. And this was actually one of the very first Imperial officers we got in the lineup, and his legs especially and everything would kind of go on to make all the others we've already looked at today. Yeah, he's got a little bit more going on his belt with a holster and some spare ammunition for his gun, because again, it is ridiculously powerful for what it is. But just thought we would mention it. And I believe that gets us through the original trilogy era. From one caped baddie to another, who's in the mood for some fried chicken? Maybe from Los Polos Hermanos? Just an idea. We, of course, come to Moff Gideon. As I said earlier, Moffs were sector governors, regional governors. They often evolved or devolved into warlords. And Gideon was no different. He was actually presumed dead immediately after the Galactic Civil War, but then re-emerged, and we get him in Mandalorian here. And as far as we know, his story is still not complete. He is definitely more of an in-the-field active. He does have some armor on, a cape. The cape detaches easy enough. And he does come with a little pistol. I'm not actually sure what type this is. It's one of the smallest ones we've seen. See? But, Gideon's pistol. The figure also comes with the dark saber, but let's be honest, he didn't deserve to have the dark saber. Well, maybe he does since he's Gus, but as Moff Gideon, no. So basically, Gus gets the dark saber, Moff Gideon, nah. Besides, he comes with his little pistol that fits very tightly If I can get it in here. I'm not going to squeeze it. It does fit if you get it in there, but again, it's a pretty tight grip because it's such a small little grip. It's probably our smallest pistol today. Notice he does have a hole in his back for his cape, whereas Gideon did not. Neat figure, though. And he does have the face technology. One of the earlier releases in the Mando line. But it goes to show you how a lot of Imperial officers that didn't actually just leave. You know, I said earlier that a lot of them were lost with Death Star 1. Well, more of a loss when Death Star 2 blew up. Meaning that for the last year or two of the Empire, you were scraping the bottom. And a lot of the Grand Admirals were either surrendered or were captured or fled. Some of them were killed. A lot of the Moffs had a similar fate. Ones like Gideon here were labeled as war criminals. Probably rightfully so, based on what he did to Mandalore. But what an intriguing villain. Kind of following on the footsteps of Timothy Zahn and the idea of who to make for a good villain. So, yeah. Moff Gideon of the Imperial Remnant. He kind of assembled a fleet of leftover Imperial assets and ships, his cruiser, some other things. And he's kind of in half dress, half battle uniform here. Probably more in the combat, if we're being honest, though. But we're not quite to the end. We have one more group to talk about.
These guys look like they're going to dinner at Mar-a-Lago.
Officers of the First Order. These were directly taken on from the Imperial officers as they fled into the unknown regions, reorganized, and became the First Order around 24 to 28 BBY. We only have two figures here, so I didn't want to do a whole video just on them. We, of course, have General Cooks. This is the later version with the face scanning and no hat. We actually have his second in charge here, just labeled as First Order Officer. I honestly forget his name. And unfortunately, he still has the old school paint from 2015-2016. To kind of cover that up, I gave him a set of binocs, which are First Order, to be fair. So, it works. And here he is with his very World War II looking hat. Little different uniform compared, but not by much. And he does have a holster. The standard pistol, we can see it with Hux here, is the Sun Blas SE-44. There's actually the SE-44s and the SE-44C. This is very much based on the SE-14R or C, but they relocated the power pack to the rear, and now an optic is standard, and they kind of address the overheating issues. In the real world, this is actually based, of all things, on a Glock 17 Gen 3, just in a carbine chassis of sorts, with some other bibs and bobs added on. First Order ranks were muddled, honestly. You had Lieutenant, Captain, Major, Colonel, ostensibly Admiral, but we mostly see generals. Pretty much the same uniform, code cylinders, Although the rank wasn't so much displayed on the chest as it was on armbands, because by this point they're really leaning heavily into the Nazi symbolism. But hey, at least they don't discriminate against gingers, right? I enjoy the hand signals their General Hux can give. In fact, the first version seems to have even more of a symbolic hand, if we will. He also has a hat. Like this guy. The hat does actually remove on this one. And again, he didn't come with the binocs, but I had a spare pair, so I thought they did good on him. Would make sense an officer would have them. Their uniforms are typically either black or gray, rather than the green, although some were also teal in color. And a lot of these were either old Imperial vets or more often young officers, probably too young, and nepotism seems to have run rampant, which is to be expected, a service in decline, if you will. But I just wanted to mention them, even though I don't really think a whole lot of the First Order in general. The officers are fine. Interestingly, these actually had different legs. You'd think they'd use the same legs, but no. And the trench coat's pretty cool on this one. It's kind of a softer rubber than others. As usual, I just wish he had a holster for his little blaster. No hat with this one. Yeah. And that gets us pretty much through the officers, at least in the uniforms. We could talk about other types of officers with the pauldrons in a separate video. Let's bring it home. And back here where we started to close out the video. If you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you like kind of my talk about blasters and all that, check out the main Mishaco channel, the Patreon for that if you like. Whatever. Just here to have some fun. Not a lot of variation, I guess, in the grand scheme, not compared to some of the Stormtroopers, but then again, some neat stuff. Even though they're based on the same basic body mold, a lot of them, that's to be expected with uniforms. It's literally right there in the name, so I don't mind it. But yeah, feel free to comment, and let's talk some Imperial officers down below. This is Misha, and catch you hopefully pretty soon, although again, pretty busy right now. But I'll be back next time.